Good morning, everyone. I am very pleased and humbled to be here, and I thank Typography and University of Moratuwa for the opportunity. My abstract talks about culture in unconventional places, lorry decoration in Sri Lanka. I first noticed lorry decoration while going to college every day from Negombo to Colombo. I'll be stuck in traffic for hours, and sometimes I get the privilege of actually seeing a lorry parked next to me, looking out of the window. And each day when you see a new lorry, I'd see new patterns, new symbols, new imagery. And it was interesting, and in college, while learning about typography, this was actually a sight for my eyes, which I was actually glad about. And now, most often than not, I'm caught in situations like this, where I tell the tuk-tuk drivers and the cab people to either chase a lorry or actually go slow so that I can take a proper picture of them, right? And Sri Lankan lorry decoration is unique and a little different from other countries that already practice it, like India and Pakistan, because I think it's mainly because Sri Lankan lorry type is purely based on typography. There's only other elements that contribute to the entire art in little aspects, but I think the entire design is basically on bold, three-dimensional, very colorful, pattern-infused typography. This is what I'm talking about. So if you're stuck in traffic or if you're going from Colombo to anywhere, I think you'd be fortunate enough to lay your eyes on a couple of these. And the sideboards are decorated, also the behind of the lorry, plus the front. Actually, the wheels, the fenders, everything has a little bit of art in them. It's mostly, so these bold 3D letters are looking pretty, but also they impart information. And it's mostly about who the lorry belongs to or what fleet the lorry is from, and or the company owner's name, and whether the lorry is insured or not, mostly, and what type of make it's from. So it's from a Leyland to Tata or all of that. And this is a typical scene in Sri Lanka where you see lorries stuck in these little alleyways in Peta. They're infested with them. The lorries also have a tradition almost of painting the route that they take, probably from places like Batiklo, which is in the Far East, and Anuradhapura to Jaffna and to Colombo. All of these lorries from across the island comes to the central business district, Colombo, and then goes back. And with another element in these decorated lorries is also the logo design of the actual builder or the painter of the lorry. And they mainly carry on like a similar theme, but they're all different. They are all from various, and I think from my research, I'd probably figured there are about probably 10 workshops that actually engage in this kind of work. But what's most interesting about this kind of typography is that these 3D bold, like very bold letters are also sectioned into pieces, and each letter carries in them even tinier art and imagery that has been captured in these. And if going by these examples right here on screen, so we have an abundance of coconut trees, and if you go further in to places where there are a lot of lakes, it's common to see these people on boats going for fishing or to get nelung leaves or something of that sort. And it's also common in rural Sri Lanka and most cities to see the mother taking the child to school. So among these sections, they mostly cover mundane day-to-day events of life, and also sometimes fantasy images like silhouettes of dragons and swans and stuff like that as well. I've also seen a couple of lovers in there somewhere, for sure. So this brings me to the context of these paintings and my paper. Sri Lanka, as you know, is a multi-ethnic, multicultural, and multi-religious country. And from our history of invasions, immigrations, it is very evident that our culture is very diverse and very complex with a lot of communities living in Sri Lanka. My research was based on, actually, I'm trying to relate to the main three communities in Sri Lanka, the ethnicities rather, the Sinhalese, the Tamils, and the Muslims. So these are a few examples of how our places of worship look like in Sri Lanka of these three ethnicities. So you see a decorative kovil inside the wall paintings of the Jataka Katha and stuff that goes inside temples and their ceilings, the painted glass windows in churches, and elaborately decorated red mosque in Petta. So for my study, I spoke to workshop owners, and I closely examined about 30 lorries from Venapuva to Petta. And in observing these lorries, I observed also that each painting or each motif that goes on these lorries or captured within this typography is mainly related, it's mainly related to these ethnicities and also the preference of the drivers or the owner of each of these lorries. So to take you through the cultural depictions in the lorries, so these are a few images which has no cultural or religious background, which is neutral. You see birds painted, you see scenery painted, ships to everything there. But most often than not in most of these lorries, you see religious symbols painted on it. And also this is one example where the Punkalasa is painted on the front of a lorry. The Punkalasa is also featured in our national emblem, and especially, for example, in our currency, one side of it is the national emblem and the other side is the denomination. And so I'm thinking as the livelihood of many of these truck owners depend on this lorry being functional and actually working, they could be insisting on having this image painted on the lorries as a sign of good luck and prosperity. And this is a comparison of the interior of the cabin of a lorry towards the right and the ceiling paintings in a temple. You see similarities. I think this also shows similarities to kolam drawings during Thai Pongal in Sri Lanka. My purpose actually was to, when I was seeing imagery day in, day out, I was thinking, who paints these and why do they paint these things? So when I went and asked them in my interviews as to where do you get inspiration from, actually the most common answer I got was that they don't know where it comes from. Most of these painters, they're young boys of 18, 19, and they just come to the workshop and they paint. And I was thinking it is probably because in Sri Lanka and world over, it's commonplace that each day in, day out, you get blasted with thousands of imagery and information. And you see it or not see it consciously, but I think it gets stored somewhere, and when you have to draw on it at some point, you draw from these things. So Sri Lanka, given the historic background and the cultural background and its richness, I think these people draw from what they've seen growing up in the country. So in my research, I found a significant amount of cultural references made in these imagery, and this could mainly and broadly be categorized into religious symbols, art, and fantasy images. And for me, lorry type has become, I think, more symbolic in being functional as well as very design-oriented. It's very visual when you see it. It's full of patterns, it's full of everything, but still it serves that function of imparting information while traveling. So in conclusion, I'd like to say that imagery within the lorry decoration and typography suggests very strong bonds that these communities and ethnicities have with their culture and their religion. And the non-religious imagery, I'd like to say that it's probably conveying or depicting the journeys from far off from Colombo and into the city, what they see when they pass the lakes and the mountains and everything. And maybe also to commit to memory some special day or scenes that they want to remember. I kind of think that these paintings are also like getting a tattoo. And I think it's mostly a form of self-expression as they travel far from home and come into the bustle of the city where it's mostly bland. I think when they drive in their lorries, I think it's a way of saying to the people who they are and what they believe in. And to conclude, I think the cities in Colombo and Sri Lanka are developing at a rapid rate, and all buildings and cultural artifacts are getting hidden or built on these days by huge skyscrapers coming up every day. I think this is a great way to catch a glimpse of our diverse culture and our identity as a diverse nation. Thank you.